Welcome to the debate. Welcome to Cognitive Dose. We are here, as always, curing blind spots, cultivating intellect, and shattering cognitive bias. I will be your guide through the baseline theory today, and across from me is our resident skeptic.
Always ready to dig into the actual data.
Right. So today we are stepping into the incredibly intense, frankly brutal landscape of Ben Horowitz's profoundly raw book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. Now, this text has essentially become a Bible in Silicon Valley.
Which is exactly why it needs a massive dose of critical scrutiny.
Well, sure. But before we critique it, we need to establish the baseline theory. To give everyone listening a quick foundation, this isn't some abstract academic theory. Horowitz is drawing on his actual first-hand experiences running LoudCloud and eventually Opsware during the catastrophic dot-com crash of the early 2000s.
Right. The supposed crucible.
It absolutely was a crucible. Institutional investors had vanished overnight. LoudCloud was bleeding cash. Their stock price plummeted to roughly 35 cents, and the NASDAQ essentially handed them a ticking time bomb. They had 90 days to get the price above $1 or face being delisted entirely.
High stakes, obviously.
Exactly. And this brings us to the core concept of the book. Horowitz argues that in these existential crises, standard management theories just evaporate. The symphony hall is on fire, the doors are locked, and nobody cares about the sheet music anymore. He introduces the strict dichotomy between the Peacetime CEO and the Wartime CEO.
And this is where the mythology really starts to build.
Well, let me explain the mechanism first. In peacetime, business is statistics. You place bets, you build consensus, you focus on culture. But in wartime, business is calculus. You cannot play the odds. You have to find the one exact, precise move to survive.
Okay, but just let me finish the framework here.
To survive, a leader has to completely abandon what Horowitz calls the positivity delusion, which is the instinct to shield the team from bad news. You rely exclusively on lead bullets. No magical silver bullets, just heavy, unsexy, grueling labor. And as a CEO, you unilaterally force your company to execute because, as the text bluntly states, nobody cares about your excuses.
Right. Have we adequately laid out the gospel of the wartime CEO now?
Executives voted against Craney because he was abrasive and made people uncomfortable. But Horowitz correctly identified that he needed a wartime general who prioritized survival over social protocol. It's like a trauma surgeon performing emergency triage. You don't worry about cosmetic scarring or bedside manner when the patient is actively bleeding out on the table. Craney was the clamp on the artery.
I am going to stop you right there. Do not use that metaphor.
Why? It perfectly illustrates the...
No, it doesn't. A trauma surgeon might be physically aggressive with the patient's body to save their life, but they do not turn around and threaten the nurses in the operating room.
Well, nobody was threatening...
Yes, they were. Let's look at the specific anecdote you are referencing. Craney stands at a podium in front of new recruits and says, quote, "I don't give a fick how well trained you are. If you don't bring me $500,000 a quarter, I'm putting a bullet in your head," unquote.
He was establishing absolute accountability.
He was establishing a hostile work environment. This entire wartime CEO construct is nothing but a dangerous intellectual justification for workplace toxicity and executive abuse.
That is a massive overstatement. The company was dying.
And defining conflict minimization and basic employee respect as mere peacetime luxuries is a highly convenient way to actively encourage ruling through fear. It subverts free will. It normalizes a high-casualty approach to human capital management. You are just shielding abusive managers under the guise of making, quote, hard choices.
But you are ignoring the results. Craney delivered. Sales increased tenfold. The employees didn't flee this supposedly abusive environment. They stayed. And look at the Darwin Project. Yes, they worked from 8 a.m. to 10 p.m., 7 days a week for 6 straight months.
Which is mass burnout masquerading as leadership.
No, it is ultimate transparency. The alternative wasn't a healthy 40-hour work week. The alternative was bankruptcy. Every single employee loses their job. Horowitz empowered them by giving them the truth and the choice to fight. Nobody quit. They survived.
They survived because of sheer luck, not because the methodology is sound. In fact, this entire text is epistemologically void.
Epistemologically void? He lived it. He literally saved the company.
He survived it. That does not make his trauma a universal law of physics. The book operates entirely on practitioner anecdotes and completely debunked psychological assumptions.
Like what?
Like the assumption that human endurance and performance can be indefinitely extracted through terror and pressure. It relies heavily on the failed ego depletion effect, the idea that willpower is just this finite resource you can forcefully hack. It is junk science.
I wouldn't call it junk science to demand excellence when...
I aggressively cite massive-scale statistical data to the contrary. Look at Google's Project Aristotle. It was one of the most comprehensive studies ever conducted on team performance. They empirically proved that psychological safety, the exact opposite of wartime terror, profanity, and manufactured conflict, is the actual primary mechanism for maximizing team performance and complex problem solving.
Okay, but Google is a peacetime monopoly. They are not facing a 90-day delisting. When you are in the trenches, sometimes you have to physically shock the system to program the culture.
Program the culture. With a $10 a minute fine for being late to a meeting.
Yes, it forces a priority shift. It's like resetting a dislocated shoulder. It is sudden, jarring, and ugly in the moment, but absolutely necessary to snap the system back into alignment. Same with allowing profanity to attract raw engineering talent. It cuts through the corporate BS.
You are dismantling your own argument by leaning on these metaphors. You are exhibiting extreme survivorship bias and falling face first into the narrative fallacy.
It is not a fallacy if it literally resulted in a $1.6 billion exit to HP. The mechanism worked.
That is exactly what survivorship bias is. You are retroactively constructing false causality within a weird/Western, educated, industrialized, rich, democratic, hyper-capitalist tech bubble.
He turned nothing into something.
He bought a winning lottery ticket and then wrote a book detailing the exact posture he was standing in when he bought it. You are completely erasing the silent graveyard of the 99% of startups that utilize these exact same hard, ruthless, toxic tactics and still went completely bankrupt.
Well, obviously not every startup succeeds, but you can't just discount the entire framework.
I can, and I do. Because even the author himself realized the damage this framework causes. He walked back this exact methodology in his subsequent books, softening his stance because he realized you cannot sustain a company on the adrenaline of abuse. The management debt it creates is fatal.
Well, look, I concede that his later work, like What You Do Is Who You Are, focuses more heavily on inclusive culture. But you have to admit that when the walls are closing in, there are no easy formulas. The line between decisive courage and destructive behavior is just incredibly thin.
No, it is not thin. Abuse is abuse, hostility is hostility, and dressing it up in military cosplay to make executives feel like heroes does not change the data.
I mean, I just think it's overwhelming to entirely dismiss the crucible he went through, the reality of the struggle.
The reality is that this blueprint is a toxin. And to our listeners, do not accept the rationalization of trauma as profound wisdom. Use this analysis to actively build your mental immunity against charismatic leadership myths. Subscribe to Cognitive Dose so you don't fall for the next one. We are done here.